86% have the notion of starting something of their own. This is a dramatic difference from the last 10 years. And I think 10 years ago, maybe it was 14%, the other 14% who were even thinking of a startup. So there is quite obviously a new interest and excitement about the idea of doing something of your own. If India today says that 1 out of 5 or 1 out of 6 kids make it to college, you have to remember that the remaining 5 out of 6 are dropping out well before. There's nothing to say that they don't build startups, but I would think that the onus on those who get the opportunity to do a higher degree to take the responsibility for creating jobs for the other 5 out of 6 or 3 out of 6 or 4 out of 6 who don't do a startup of their own, some of that onus shifts to those who have the privilege of coming to higher education. But I'm not here to give you a moral lecture on what your responsibility is. I think the opportunity at this time of becoming an entrepreneur, of doing a startup, of following your dream, and therefore creating something which you can call your own, this idea is getting a lot of traction. This is also a time when someone with a good idea is going to be followed by people who have money. Today, if you have a good idea and you can sell that idea in front of a group of people who have the money, you are likely to find enough people interested to come and listen to you. Then, of course, the question is how good your idea is, how well you articulate it. So the big question of taking a risk with your few years, if you have a good idea, the opportunity to get support, funding support, exists. In this room, I know there is a lot of students, so if I just get a show of hands of who all are students, just raise your hand. Students of any year, okay, vast majority at the back. How many of you who raised your hands have till now harbored the idea of doing a startup? Now this is a very, this is one hand, 2, 3. Can I keep waiting so more hands go up as you form your decision? Now this is not a good story at IIT. And I know there are few students from outside. So quite clearly, if the IITs get the brightest, and my institute, IIT Delhi, is not getting them to show their hands up, something needs to be done to trigger this thought in your mind. And my purpose here in these 2 or 3 minutes was only to say that our president of the association is now getting many of us as alums to take some responsibility and at least sow this seed in people's mind to say, don't just be job seekers. It's important to make wealth. Of course, it's important. So you have to do well. But there are better ways to make wealth very quickly so that you have a lot of time in your life than to use that wealth for a purpose which gives you more satisfaction. I want to just close by saying that yesterday I went to it's a very, very good human being, a person called Mr. Nyotia, died last year of cancer. He had built one of the most respected companies called Ambuja Cement, some of you may know. He sold it a few years ago and used that money for culture, for education, for many good things. And I got to know him only a few years ago, and he used to say, I wish that money had been in my hands much earlier, because he said something very nice. He said, all of us work very hard and are very excited by possessing things. But there's a stage in life when that possession starts to become a pain. And he says you want to get rid of the pain by giving away what you've got. And his regret was he thought of it too late in life. So my suggestion to all of you is that it's very important for you to do well. It's important. You have to generate wealth. And the fastest way is to do it with a startup, take a risk. But then be very clear right from the beginning that when you make that wealth, what are you going to do with it? So a measure could very well be for IITians of how many jobs does each of us create rather than how many millions we make. We have to recognize that's the need of the hour and that's the best way to create jobs. So the whole startup conclave is a signal today to say that IIT students have to think about this as a path, to become job creators. And the first session today is going to just open up your mind to what all support exists if you come forward and want to build your own venture. Thank you so much.
Now I will request the person sitting on the dais to come in the front to release the coveted coffee table book of IIT Delhi, Through the Lens.
So please.
Sir.
So please.
It's my honor and privilege now to invite the Honorable Minister Dr. Jitendra Singh, Minister of State for the Prime Minister's Office, to deliver the inaugural address. Dr. Jitendra Singh, please.
Chairman of the IIT Alumni Association and the star of this morning's ceremony, Dr. Deepak Dogra, Director IIT, Professor Kshitij, Mr. Pawar, Mr. Jalan, and all the senior alumni, as well as I can see a lot of students over here, faculty members, ladies and gentlemen. At the outset, I have to thank you for having given me this opportunity to be here this morning with you. And as Mr. Pawar was saying, that I always try to sneak out time to be here. I think in a year's time, this is possibly my third visit. The first, of course, after Professor Kshitij took over as director. And I was, I think, last time here also for a science workshop or something like that. It's also partly because of an urge, a craving for academics, and also being a student of science, I have an opportunity to go back wiser each time that I come here. I have to, at the outset, congratulate and perform the pleasant job of congratulating the author of the coffee table book, for the release of which precisely I was invited. I'm sorry I'm not using the written text which was given to me, because I usually avoid doing that. I've never done that all my life, so I apologize right in the beginning. And I learned not to use the text prepared by the organizers very early in my life, luckily, when soon after I did my post-graduation, I was still to enter into a job. And before they could actually place me, I'm sorry I'm diverting from it, because it's an author's forum at the same time, creative people, so I think there'll be a good food for thought for somebody like Mr. Dogra. So I was asked to report to the Rashtrapati Bhavan to be part of the team of the Rashtrapati. And I was the youngest and the last man in the long queue of that medical team that used to accompany Gyani Singh Ji wherever he went. So I actually didn't have to perform any medical tasks. I just had to wait in the wings. And we went to a university where the president had to deliver a convocation address. And as was his style, full of humor and originality. So when he had to speak, the president said कि ये जो मैंने कहना था वो मेरी तकरीर तकसीम हो गई, तो आपने पढ़ ली. Because that had already, the booklet had been already distributed. And then Gyani ji suddenly said, लेकिन पन्ना नंबर 4 पलटिए. Of course, everybody started, turning to that page. तो बोले इसमें जो तीसरे नंबर पर पैरा है ये ना पढ़िएगा. So when you ask somebody not to read, starts reading that. And then after a while he says, I know you would have read it. तो इसलिए पढ़ने को नहीं कहा था, क्योंकि मैंने अपने सेक्रेटरी से कहा था कि यहाँ पर मेरे भाषण में महिला शिक्षा पर बल देना. परंतु जितनी PhD मेरे हाथ से दिलवाई सारी महिलाओं को दिलवा दी. So that has gone wrong. So having said that,
I think we have to make sure that this morning is devoted to the creative work of Dr. Dogra and his immense contribution. I just learned a couple of moments earlier that he's already authored as many as 12 books earlier. And I think he's already made his place beyond the alumni reach. He's made his place for the posterity, because it's been my considered belief that when monarchs, kings, emperors get reduced to oblivion or to the footnotes of the history books, the authors have a longer life. And just as a writer lives longer than an emperor, a writing lives longer than a writer. So I'm sure Dr. Dogra has very cleverly manipulated his longevity. And I say so not for nothing, because I myself been a science researcher for the last 30 years almost. I was the other day in Kolkata. I said, when you talk of freedom fighters, before naming anybody else, you talk of Tagore. And over here in central India, which is the heart of freedom struggle, you talk of Munshi Premchand more often. So, having said that, just as a book has a long shelf life, a table book, as he wants this book to be called, will have a long table life, I hope. And will come handy to anybody who watches it. And this kind of a creation or a work could actually be expected only from somebody like Dr. Dogra, because he's not trained to write, thankfully. He's not been a conventional student of literature. He's been an IITian and then a management student and then dabbling in all sorts of activities other than literature. But out of urge, out of spontaneity, creating something which sometimes carries much more worth than that created by the professional literarians or the teachers of literature. I remember Francis Bacon once wrote that the greatest harm to the cause of literature is done by the students of literature and the teachers of literature, because they expect their students to listen to all long discourses about Shakespeare and others in dingy classrooms, go back home and mug it up, and they shut the doors of creativity. And I can also say this from my personal example, which was very kindly referred to by Dr. Dogra. He read such an elaborate introduction of mine, it sounded like a matrimonial column. So I was asking myself whether I am here to compliment Dogra or Dogra is here to compliment me. But yes, there is something in common among two of us when I went through his profile. When I published my first book, that was around 1994, and the book release, I said that my only regret is that my formal education in English language, as Mr. Pawar would know, because he's been my mighty senior in school, mighty because many years senior, was only up to class 11 or so, because that was the time, and later on we were mostly engaged in medical studies, like many of you in engineering studies. And therefore I said, if still I am still accepted as a writer of sorts, it's a quirk of fate. It's an anomaly which nobody can explain. But then some of us, work harder out of vengeance to prove ourselves. And around the 1980, I think Dogra ji has been luckier because he's been publishing books so easily. Was not the case with me. When I started writing, and those days, yes, we have a lot of alumni from the old times. You would recall that the Illustrated Weekly of India used to publish one short story in each issue. So I thought I was a good short story writer. I thought, not that I was. And therefore I started sending them. Mr. Khushwant Singh was the editor in Mumbai, and I still have, I don't know where I have placed, but I have placed that very safely, a huge pile of small slips that Mr. Khushwant Singh had, kept in readiness. Small slip with compliments and regrets. Only 4 words. Because he didn't have time to, reply all and sundry like me. So small slip, handy, and his secretary would neatly put in that. And I have a huge pile. I happened the opportunity of seeing Mr. Singh a few years before his death, and I could show him that. And he had a hearty laugh. Because obviously he had to publish one short story in a month, and I couldn't have qualified for that. And then, incidentally, around the same time, the Times of India happened to publish a middle of mine. So I got very excited. Suddenly I thought, no, I could do it, and I was worth it. So those days you didn't have these email and net thing, all these high-tech privileges. So I flooded the Bahadur Shah Zafar Road office with postage every day of my write-ups. I said I should flood them so that they would, keep repeating me, but they didn't. And 3-4 months passed. So I ventured walking into the Times of India office of Bahadur Shah Zafar Road. Mr. Girilal Jain was the editor. And the middles were being looked after, because those days middles carried a great significance in the print media. So middles were being looked after by an assistant editor called Mr. Tiwari. I know old timers must be recalling, on every Wednesday in Times of India there was a middle by Tiwari. Tiwari was the name of the village in Tamil Nadu where he came from, and that he was using as his pen name. So it was just pre-lunch, and I went to him and I said, sir, once it was published and never again. So he showed me a huge pile of postage that he had received on that given day. And he said, now listen to me, my young boy. We have 7 days in a week. One day is Sunday Times, the magazine, so no middle. Out of 6 days, Wednesday I write my middle, because my employer wants me to earn my living through this. Now left is 5 days. We have Henry Miller around, we have C.L. Proudfoot around. We had all those big names that time, still very active. So where do you figure? So he said, we can go down, have lunch. If you want to have something more before the lunch, that also can be offered, but no publication. And then gradually we had somebody called Mr. Inderjeet, who was also an member of parliament, and started an agency called INFA, which still is there. Mr. Inderjeet is not there, but his daughter is operating it from Delhi. So that's how it started, and once it became readable, then of course they started writing. Then another interesting story, which Mr. Dogra didn't go through, he's referred to my 8 books. When I published my first book in 1994, it was nothing much of an effort. It was simply a collection of the articles or write-ups which I had done in the preceding 10 years. I thought I had written very well, so everybody would like to read. But that book didn't move out of the bookstall. It didn't move at all. And the result was that the publisher, who's of course Delhi-based, swore not to publish me again. Then, as I said, those who are not formally into literature have the urge to, which is quite nagging, quite haunting. So one day I gathered courage and I confronted him. He's of course no more now, his progeny.